Welcome to the monthly Truck Stop webinar provided by the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation as a part of the TRS Risk Specialist Program. These webinars are presented as an industry updates for information purposes only. They do not qualify for state CE credit. The foundation does provide state CE credit in a different format, and if you're interested in state CE credit, contact our office at trs@ibci.net, and we'll give you the information concerning CE. Let me move the slide here. If you have any questions presented during this presentation, type them in the chat window, and we'll answer them if time allows. If not, we'll send you an email afterwards that will address it. And if it's such a question such that we feel that is everyone would be interested in, with your permission, we'll ask you if we can share this with everybody else. Also, every now and then we have an audio problems or another problem with it. If you still have the presentation live, you can type in the chat window you have a problem.
You've got mail.
If not, you can call our office at 800-741-4084, and we'll try to correct those things. There is one thing, though, about these webinars. Once we're finished with them, we post them on our website. And if you want to share this with people in your office, or even in this case, since we're having something very important for your insureds, your motor carriers, you can share these webinars with your motor carrier as a member of this Insurance Education Foundation. So we will let you know when they're posted. Usually it takes a week or so afterwards, but then you can replay them and use them at your convenience, or for you to show your insureds, or again, people in your office, how to address this very important subject. Let's start here thinking about this. Is a motor carrier's possibly or current insured CSA and SMA scores important to the insurance provider? Absolutely. I just got through doing an advanced underwriting, and we discussed it for numbers of hours. This has become, and their scores have become, a key consideration in obtaining insurance for the motor carriers. And the understanding of where the scores are derivative of, and how to look at them and how to analyze them, becomes an important part of providing insurance to the motor carriers, in my opinion. I have said often in front of the presentations we do that in today's marketplace, with all the pressure from the federal government, from shippers, from the legal systems, that the retail agent needs to be in a position to offer their insureds, their motor carriers, more than a piece of paper. And these webinars we present through the Motor Carriers Education Foundation is to assist you to do a better job for your insureds, and we hope that you will take it and do those things. We'll talk a little bit more about these scores and where they come from. But a part of this is sometimes the scores are not correct. And sometimes your insured will say, well, you've got this information, but that's not correct. We weren't there. We didn't have that accident. We didn't have that inspection. I didn't know about those things. And so that becomes a concern. The first question I have for you, and if you have people who've been in my previous presentations know that we're a big advocate of finding out about your scores on a monthly basis. We have developed a special program for members of the Motor Carriers Education Foundation that allows you to list with carrier software their principals and their address is listed on the website, Greg Leach, and if you develop a relationship with him, and the relationship doesn't require a written contract, all it requires is a information source at no cost to you, where you develop or understand how to access this information, and you give him a deposit. The key word there is a deposit. If you ever decide it's not beneficial to you, the money comes back if you don't use it up. But in that process, you can put online in their webinar your motor carrier's DOT number, and the software will send you an email anytime something changes with the motor carrier's online information, either contained in SMS or contained in the Safer portal with the motor carrier's profile, or excuse me, snapshot. If any of those things change, then you get an email. What you would get an email with as a part of that program is you'll get an email monthly with your insured CSA scores. Now, as you know, since the FAST Act in 1st of December, those scores are not available to us anymore. Before, we could see if an insured had an alert. We could go in and track it ourselves, even though it would be costly and cumbersome if we had to do them all. But by doing this, setting this information up, you can still get a very close proximity to the CSA scores. There are providers out there who are still providing CSA scores, Carrier Software being one. Most of you in the insurance industry have heard of Statistical Analysis Bureau being another. Those scores are close to what the actual scores are. I use the term close, and I'm talking about very close. The only time there's a difference in it because both CSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Carrier Software, and CAB use the same raw data. Carrier Software, CAB, Vigilo, and others buy the data from FMCSA. So everybody's dealing with the same data, and then they put it in the formula, and that then gives the CSA scores and the alerts and the safety event groups and things like that. Only time they could be different is if there's a different time when the scores are promulgated. FMCA promulgates the scores at the end of every month and publishes the first week of the following month. They don't give the exact time or not. So if Carrier Software or CAB goes in and runs that raw data within their formula, if they're doing it at a different time than the federal government, it would not be more than a couple, 3 or 4 days, but if it's a day or two, there could be information coming in and out. So sometimes the scores are not exact. If you want the insurer's exact scores, you can get them a PIN number. But to get this estimated scores on a monthly basis, you can go and develop this relationship with Carrier Software. And folks, it costs $12 a year, $1 a month to get this report. I am amazed why everybody out there that's listening to this does not do this, because then you can share this report or you can see something happening, and when you see the scores are going up or you see they're having out-of-the-service violations or inspections, then you as a retail agent can ask them, is this really you? Is this really your vehicle? Did this really happen? And so when a violation is shown and the insured says it's not correct because you responded, and now you're able to bring this up to them, particularly if they get close to an alert, because you're tracking it on a monthly basis with this program that's provided just for members of the foundation. And that happens, then my concern there is we need to call someone to help us walk through that. And this is going to be what our webinar is today. So I call my expert in this, and that expert is Bridgette M. at the J. Taylor Law Firm. For you who annual conference have had the privilege of hearing Bridgette discuss things. She'll be at our annual conference again this year. J. Taylor has been a part of our programs. So with all that said, Bridgette, please tell them a little bit about yourself and welcome them, and then we'll go forward.
Well, Tommy, thank you so much for that introduction. As he's indicated, my name is Bridgette Blitch. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Taylor and Associates, here with offices in Winter Haven, Florida, as well as Miami. But we have the pleasure of representing motor carriers, brokers, shippers, warehouses, pretty much any entity up and down the supply chain throughout the United States. So it's my pleasure to be here today. A little bit about my background. I've been working with J.W. Taylor, actually even before he opened the law firm of Taylor and Associates, and came from Colorado to Florida to work with him. My passion has always been to work in transportation law. Before I was a lawyer, I was the editor-in-chief of the Transportation Law Journal at the University of Denver, and had an opportunity to meet some great people there, which ultimately led me into the industry. So it's been a pleasure practicing in this area, and I'm happy to share my knowledge with what I see in the industry with respect to the scores of motor carriers, the concerns that come up, and how we address them.
Bridgette, in that area, I know that this is one area that your firm and you particularly specialize in. How often does the motor carrier call you up, or hopefully in some cases the insurance professional who's helping the motor carrier call you up concerning this? And usually what are some of the questions that are asked?
Well, Tommy, we get questions at least weekly that come up from new clients to existing clients concerning their scores. And the question can be prompted as a result of a motor vehicle accident. It can be prompted through a roadside inspection, through a DOT audit, or just based on the company's own internal review of their CSA scores.
I'm sorry, and I think that you, and we have talked this earlier, and you might just want to make a comment about the importance of the retail agents to help the insured and the availability. I know you have reviewed carrier software information about how that could be an asset to the agent to help the insured to kind of cement that, and that you would welcome a retail agent to contact you and try to set this thing up, would you not?
Oh, absolutely, Tommy, and that's another important issue that you raised, that as it comes up in time for renewal, the client quickly realizes that underwriters are looking at their CSA scores, which is causing them to turn their attention to maybe something that they didn't look at as closely before. So certainly would welcome any questions or anything that I can do to assist in that regard.
And the question you just had is, and the part that I'm trying to bring to the forefront here is, at renewal time it might be too late. If you track the scores on a monthly basis, maybe you can make these corrections before it goes too far south. Where are these scores coming from? Let's look at this next page, and this is the CSA. And the CSA is the safety, compliance, safety, accountability. And the data that goes into the system starts from the roadside and or the port of entries inspections in most cases. Bridgette, we have discussed earlier, and I know you have a great relationship with Florida enforcement officers. In fact, for you who are listening to this today and have not signed up for the annual conference, or if you have signed up for the annual conference, you can look forward to the Friday afternoon session. It's going to be led by Bridgette, and in that session we're going to have a representative from the, I think two in fact, from the Florida Highway Patrol. They're going to explain to the audience about why they stop a truck, what they look at, what level of inspections they'll do, and we're going to play a level 1 inspections. That level 1 inspections, we plan to, we've had it negotiated that we want to make it then available to you, the members of the foundation, to then be able to share this with your insureds. But in talking to the officers, Bridgette, why do, I always say they stop a truck when they are motor carrier in the vehicle, when they get a chance to look at it, and I say if the truck's speeding or if the light's not burning, or I also use a comment if it gets dirty, or we have one insurance provider at one time said if it's a red truck, they tend to bring their attention to stop it. But my whole point is that typically it doesn't get involved for inspection unless the DOT officer gets their attention, and there's thousands of trucks that run down the highway. I know you have done some ride-alongs, so will you spend a couple of minutes in this to share with us exactly your experience there and why you see an officer stops, and what the motor carrier can do and train their drivers when they're stopped to maybe make this process go smoother?
Oh, absolutely. So the CSA, the purpose of that is that the states are required to enforce the commercial motor safety regulations. So when I have the pleasure of working with the Florida Highway Patrol and getting invited to a ride-along, it's my opportunity to witness how law enforcement makes sure that the motor carriers are compliant with the federal motor carrier safety regulations, and ultimately collecting that information and reporting it to the respective motor carriers' CSA or SMS profile. In my experience, I've seen from, for example, watching law enforcement at weigh stations come through, and some of the motor carriers are larger operations. Maybe every 5 minutes we see a truck roll through the company that has a route, for example, between Orlando and Tampa, where I had a particular opportunity to do a ride along. And what I see is law enforcement recognizes that company, that they have looked at their operations before. They know that they're complying with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. There are other instances then where it may be a carrier, a motor carrier, that law enforcement doesn't recognize, maybe the first time coming through that way station, that prompts them to pull the carrier in and do an inspection and have them pull aside to their parking lot in the way station and determine what level of inspection they're going to do. Other instances, Tommy, like you said, it may be something visual that law enforcement sees as they pull the truck through that prompts them to do an investigation. And outside the context of a way station, we have clients that get pulled over again for the same reasons. Either they're not known in that particular state, and so this is an opportunity for law enforcement to investigate a new motor carrier, or it's something visual on the outside of the equipment, or it's speeding for a cargo securement issue.
Once they get on that list, though, they tend to stay on that list, do they not? And so this is why correcting this data could affect them in the long term.
Yes, so, and that's where we get a lot of calls, that we either new or existing clients reach out to us because they feel that they are being continually inspected at particular locations, and they are concerned that they want to make sure that either the inspections that they're getting, the clean inspections, get reported, or if they're getting violations for any one of their basic categories, that we ensure that are those violations correctly assessed under the Commercial Motor Vehicles Safety Regulations, or do we need to challenge them?
And these violations, again, that's the big part here. So you understand all the stuff that you're looking at CSA, SMS comes from these roadside inspections or an on-site compliance or a non-rated visit by the DOT officer on their site. So all that data is coming from the great deal of this roadside data, or this data is on the scores, is coming from the roadside inspections. The DOT officer writes that inspections up and sends it into the system. And so this then gets us into the measurement system, and Bridget, you want to spend a few minutes about this CSA measurement systems, and it will lead to the interventions that we deal with here. And you also at this just could spend a couple of minutes about how the court systems look at some of this stuff.
Of course. So this chart right here is, I'm a visual person, so I put this up here because I think it sets out a good diagram of how safety information is collected and ultimately reported on our motor carriers or clients' SMS scores. So it comes from inspections, or like I mentioned, accidents, and that information then gets put into the online analysis and information portal, where you can see that there are different, they call them basic categories, but it's how the government is looking at and evaluating the safety of the motor carrier. So unsafe driving would be situations where we have improper lane change. Hours of service compliance would be anything from form and manner violations to logbook or driving over hours of duty. Driver fitness, we maybe get a situation where we have a driver that has his or her CDL disqualified or didn't register their medical card. We've got controlled and substance abuse, and then vehicle maintenance. That's another basic score that we tend to see a lot of violations if the company is not maintaining their equipment. We see a lot of hits in that particular category. For hazardous materials haulers, there's a basic category for that. and then we also have a crash indicator, which is not a public view, but that is also a category to collect information.
And that's the stop lights you see on the right-hand side. That's the inspection selection system, and that gives them some guidance as to when they're stopped. And in that system, when the DOT, as I understand it, when the DOT officer, whether at the weigh station or riding down the highway, puts the insurer's DOT number in, that stoplight shows up on their computer, and if they have a lower score, meaning no alerts or maybe only one, and they're familiar with them, and the score is less than 49, they say pass. If it's 50 to 74, that's yellow, says worthwhile. But if it's over 75, that says they're going to be stopped every time their number's in there, unless there's some other reason that the officer doesn't have time to stop. Is that the way you understand how that system works and that stoplight over there?
Yes. And so where we get in and look at is on the analysis and information profile on those categories, there is a intervention threshold. And so if we start to see that intervention threshold tick up, getting closer to the point where they have an acceptable range, we want to make sure we intervene and address, is this a violation because of something we need to correct internally in our operations, which is critical, or is it a violation that was incorrectly reported, whether it wasn't associated with our US DOT number, or we have some other defense to the violation that we need to challenge.
Now, the insured can track these violations with their PIN number as often as they go into the website, can they not?
Correct. Yes.
And how long does it usually take between an inspection and getting the system? 2 or 3 days?
It varies, but yes, I would say within a week it would be online. Although we've had instances where clean inspections, for example, haven't been reported, so we have to address that.
Yeah, that's a very point that we can talk about as we go through this formula. Anyway, this important part of this is to don't be part of the ISS, because the more alerts you have and the higher scores, you're going to be stopped more often. And then once you're stopped, you're going to have a visit from a DOT officer, and then your insurers are going to have a problem, because if they exceed those thresholds and this intervention process starts, then at renewal time they're going to have a tough time getting insurance. At court time, they're going to have another layer of defense that lawyers like Bridgette and Jay and others that we out has to defend the whole motor carrier's action, not the driver's action just at that day. And thirdly, even some shippers are still using this, so it might impact their loads. So if they're operating bad and these violations are legitimate, then the thing that we can do is help them do better. And I know, Bridgette, you help them do that, putting in a safety program. I know you have internal people that you recommend, your firm recommends, to help a motor carrier get better safely. We have loss prevention people connected with our insurance companies or others to help them get better. And again, retaliation help them get better. But some of these violations will be ones that the motor carrier did not cause. We were just in a seminar today, or this week at Advanced Underwriting in Orlando, and Greg brought up a situation where he upped the motor carrier because when he did the profile, which you can do, and Bridgette, you've seen his product, where you can see each vehicle that's been inspected and which ones are causing the problems, and with the motor carrier's PIN number, you can even put a name there, and they pulled one for a motor carrier they looked at, and they put the PIN number in, and one of the drivers that was causing the majority of their violations wasn't one of their employees. It never was one of their employees. They have no idea why it got there, but there was a series of violations removed from their location, not even their trade area, which wasn't their employees, yet that was affecting their scores. So when those kind of things are found, this is when they need to call you. So now they call you and they say, we got a problem. Let's walk through then what you do. How do you deal with this magic system called DataQ?
Yeah, and let me add one more point before we leave this slide that you mentioned that I just want to emphasize, is that when this information is collected from the roadside inspections, the weigh stations, or the accidents, and it's adding on to the SMS score for the motor carrier. What I have seen, the more that these basic scores go over that threshold, the more likely it is that the Department of Transportation is going to say, it's time for us to do an on-site audit of your operations. And that's when the motor carrier has to be prepared to ensure that they are following every aspect of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, which they, of course, they should be doing anyway. But if that is not addressed, that's the next step, which of course can lead to notice of claims for penalties that get assessed to the motor carrier, and a change in their safety rating, which is obviously very critical to the motor carrier. So that's why we want to make sure that we focus in on these violations to ensure that they're not going to have that deep impact in their operations.
That's a good point. And once you get on that list, I also assume that you wrote officers, and they're human, ones that they have previous problems with, they'll dig in deeper than ones they don't have any problems with, because they're looking for those specific things that has come to their attention before. And if there's something that's wrong, then that would cause that inspection to maybe go longer, to a different level, or even to be in areas they look into. And we all know when you look at a truck running the highway, unless it just comes out of the dealership, and I worry about that sometimes, there's something they could find if they really want to.
Right, right. So they just need to be vigilant with what's going on in their day-to-day operations and the result that could happen of a closer inspection of their operations. Because if they get to the point where they're doing an on-site inspection of their operations, this is where we have the opportunity. Let's say we get a conditional rating from an inspection, and we don't. This is the point we've gone too far. We should have intervened, many moons ago. But if that does happen, here is another opportunity to go in and do a DataQ challenge for any other violations.
And the term DataQ, I mean, we pointed out in classes and look at it, and it has it there on the SAFER webpage. You click in to do a DataQ or not. But it's always been a mystery, and we've heard things in the past that hasn't been able to get things off, and I know there's some new stuff. So then let's look at this mystery called DataQ.
All right, so the DataQ system has been set up by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration as a way for motor carriers, and it's also available to drivers, to challenge violations that come up on their scores. And this is just kind of an overview. So if it's an inspection like we talked about, weigh stations or roadside inspections, and we get a citation, we can do what's called a request for data review, or RDR. Or we get an inspection, we see that a clean inspection is not reported, and we want to make sure that that gets uploaded onto our profile. DataQ is another way to do that. For drivers, we want to make sure that our drivers who are out there, if they go and we represent the individual drivers or owner-operators, that their profile accurately reflects their driving record. So this is the most common reasons why I get involved in the DataQ system.
Good. That vast point, even individual drivers can come to you. That's a good thing, too, to understand in case you have a, say that now my PSP, pre-employment screening program, in the DSMSS has some information that's false. I guess that's another reason to do that. So this is the web page you start with, huh?
Yes, so I wanted to share with the audience what it looks like for your insureds when they go in and to start the DataQ process. So the first thing that they'll want to do is they'll want to register and create a profile. So they'll have a username and password that they will enter in each time to access the DataQ portal and to take whatever corrective action they want to take. So this is the first page that they'll see.
All right. You have to have their PIN number, so you get that. So the insured would have to have give you the PIN number, give the agent, give the PIN number to you to effect this, correct?
Correct. So what the PIN number does is it verifies that you are, in fact, the motor carrier that is registering for the access to this portal, so that the FMCSA and the states that are reviewing the information that you file on the DataQ can confirm and authenticate the identity of the motor carrier. Again, we want that protection there because sometimes we see information that should not be reported, so this is a way for the states to make sure that they're hearing the motor carrier with that's filing the challenge. And this brings up a point that the federal government does not go in and just make changes to the system. What this allows the motor carrier to do, or the driver to do, is request the state who issued the violation to review the content of the challenge, and then the states have a mechanism. They have their own interface, just like here we have the motor carrier, the driver having their own interface to enter this information. Each state has their own interface into the system on the backside. So here is the initial, just getting registered. We verify, we create our account profile, and obviously for our clients, we always tell them to protect their information and limit who has access to that profile, and then to keep a copy for their records. So then the next stage in the DataQ process is either taking an action in the system or monitoring an existing action if you have already filed a request for data review. So this is the next page that I've captured here just to see what the next step is and the option that the client or the insured would have. And once you get to this stage, this is an overview of the different options that the motor carrier is going to be presented with once they're at the stage of adding a request for data review. And you can see it indicates we've got roadside and non-roadside, similar to what Tommy and I were just talking about. And the most common being under the roadside, where I have violations for inspections that I want to challenge. There is a note here where it says crash event. And one of the shortcomings of the DataQ system is that the states or the federal government do not look at preventability. So whether or not a crash was as a result of the fault of the driver or the motor carrier is not considered. So FMCSA will not entertain a request to review data if the RDR is submitted on that premise. And actually,
Bridgette, I understand that. I think I even read something today. They are looking at ability to do that, and I think the 4 scenarios, or the ones I read, is that they were hit by a driver if the truck was parked. If they hit an animal, they could come in and do. But that's not today. That's something that we're looking at in the future that will probably come forward before it's over with, because I understand there's pressure being put on the FMCSA by the ATA and others to take care of the clearly not at fault, where the truck was parked and got hit, or they got rear-ended, which they had nothing to do with, and all that. I'm sure you were familiar with that proposal to have a causation factor where you could challenge the causation.
Yeah, you're giving away all the good stuff, Tommy.
I'm sorry. Well, you brought the crash events here. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll limit it to you. I'll be quiet now. Take care.
No, you're good.
I'm paying attention. That's the good part, right?
Yes, it is. But no, that's, again, part of the shortcomings of what we have with the existing DataQ system is that it really chokes the motor carrier on what they can challenge, just as the instances you mentioned. And so what happens currently is that if the information is submitted what the FMCSA does is, okay, we use this for statistical purposes only. And what will happen is that the motor carrier will get this automatic response that's generated through the DataQ system, and basically says that we don't consider preventability, and they get this nice little letter each time, thank you for using the DataQ website, and that's pretty much the end of it. But a lot of companies still go ahead and put that information in just so they have a record of it in their system, challenging that this was not an at-fault accident and it was not preventable. So there is that particular category there for crash events. Now there are other considerations that the FMCSA will consider where we will go in and we'll challenge a crash event because it doesn't qualify as a DOT reportable accident. So a DOT reportable accident being a fatality, an injury, or that a vehicle was towed away. So we can challenge the report if we believe it doesn't otherwise qualify as a reportable accident.
Bridgette, I want to make absolutely correct that there's a point that everybody needs to. The injury has to be an injury treated at the crash site, not something that if they go home and go to the doctor 3 days later. It has to be an ambulance at the site, or they have to be removed for treatment at the site. Yes,
then that's immediately receives medical treatment away from the scene of the crash, and that's exactly right. So that is another way to challenge a crash event through this particular system. The other is if there is a crash reported and it's assigned to the wrong motor carrier, then we file a request to have that removed and identify that we were not the motor carrier of record involved in that particular accident. So there still is limitations on what can be done to correct the crash data. There are still some opportunities out there, and we want to make sure that we do not have any crashes being reported that are not DOT reportable or that do not involve the insured or the client. The next item is the inspections and violations. And as I mentioned, this is where we get the bulk of our requests from our clients, whether it be for roadside inspection or an inspection at a waste station, and it can be in any one of the categories that we talked about in the basic categories, maintenance or driver fitness. And we'll walk through that in a little bit more detail. Now, there is a section here for warnings. However, the FMCSA says that they don't consider warnings. If there is a warning there, we do report that into the system, as it shouldn't be. The warning shouldn't be reflected onto the CSA score of the motor carrier. Then we also have the non-roadside information where, let's say, we have a US DOT audit or investigation. And this is kind of going back to what I mentioned, Tommy, a few minutes ago, where we may have a DOT audit, and that audit can identify violations on our score. But there's a separate procedural component that the motor carrier needs to be sure that they follow under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations to challenge notice of claims or to make changes to safety fitness rating determinations. But here, sorry,
No, I just was going to mention that I find the on-site violations that lead to a problem, if it's then cited, that might in a lot of cases be even worse than roadside, because those scores and those, and I think a serious violations will be written up. That alert stays there a year, even if the problem is corrected. where at least the roadside has some limiting effect. Once it gets 6 months old and then a year old, it goes down. So to challenge those probably would be as important, even not more important.
Absolutely, yes. So this can be an opportunity where if you've had an on-site inspection, you want to go back and challenge a violation that was reported from an investigation, that you can do that again. So this is not the same procedure that you would otherwise follow to challenge any type of notice of claim that may be associated with that audit. So that's just a limitation with respect to that system. The other component here is if you've got information, the registration and insurance, some companies will go through and they'll update their filings through the DataQ process. A lot of companies do that just as a faster means to update their information and their insurance. And then there's also a portal for those household goods motor carriers that we represent to address any potential complaints that they may get. So those are just the general categories with which the motor carrier can exercise different options in ensuring that their score is correct. So here when we talked about the crash event and what are some of the options here, this just lists a few others. Duplicate, if it's listed multiple times, and I've seen that happen, or there's a crash record missing from the carrier or the driver report. So these list some other type of tools that are available to the motor carrier in the event of an accident. And what is nice about this system is that it is user-friendly, and if you know where to navigate, it does guide the motor carrier as to here's where we can go next in this system. When the action item is to challenge an inspection or a violation, here's the next page that will come up where we can identify what it is that we want to do with the inspection. Again, we have the same duplicate issues, or we can request a copy of the report, or it's not mine. We do see that come up where it's not the right US DOT number. Maybe the motor carrier sold the equipment and the US DOT number, for whatever reason, is still on the side of the truck, and then the motor carrier gets cited for that violation. So we've seen that happen. Then we get violations from a roadside inspection. Let's say the client, the insured, calls and they just did a pre-trip inspection on their equipment and everything was satisfactory. There were no issues with the equipment. The driver proceeds to get pulled over during the course of the trip, and the officer identifies that there is an oil leak. So the officer may not know or be a mechanic to understand, in my very, very, very limited experience in going underneath of a truck, which I'd like to keep that way, that the different models, some look like they're oil leaks, and I've been with officers that say, nope, that's just, that's the make of the engine, and that's how it runs. And so I've had clients call me with their respective models that they operate and say, no, this truck is in top condition. There was no oil leak for my unit. So I always ask them, well, did you take a picture of that, what the officer was identifying as an oil leak? And so this leads into best practices when you're going through an inspection. One of the shortcomings of this system is that it puts the burden on the driver or the motor carrier, in both, usually, to present back to the state the basis for why the violation should not have been assessed. So in my situation with an oil leak, that if I have a photograph of the engine or the area where there's supposedly this oil leak, and I can get from my client information as to, okay, this is the type of engine, this is how it operates, and this is standard within specifications, to take that back to the state as to why this violation should be removed. It's going to be increase the likelihood of success on a DataQ challenge having that information available to me. What I will say is that law enforcement in Florida have advised me that you could file, let's say you have an oil leak and you don't have any information, and let's just say you just say, I can test the violation, and you don't put anything further in your RDR, that Florida will go ahead and they'll investigate the basis for why that violation was issued, and they'll talk to the officer that issued the violation and make sure that the violation had a basis before it was reported on the carrier through their commercial motor vehicle examination report. Basically, I don't recommend that because while that is what we would hope law enforcement would do, we want to give them every reason why they should remove the points and remove the violation from the visibility of the carrier's score and impacting the carrier's score. So these are, this instance right here is where, whether it's a maintenance violation or a driver fitness issue, that we go in and I look at the commercial motor vehicle examination report that was issued as a result of the inspection, and we'll go through and identify the report by number and the violation and proceed to put forth our basis for why the violation should be removed.
And this is critical then for the insured to be aware of it soon, like the oil leak and all, that they got the pictures in there. I mean, if they find out this 3 weeks later, it's going to be harder to take pictures and harder to prove that, will it not be, to show exactly what happened with, and you would suggest that any video or pictures would have a time stamp on it and things like that, as close as possible to these inspections?
Yes, absolutely, Tommy. There you go. You're giving away all the good stuff.
Go ahead. I'm just trying to. Still paying attention. Still paying attention. Just let you know.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly right. So when I go through and I do training for motor carriers and drivers, I advise them that we want to collect all the information at the inspection that we can in order to be successful in a subsequent request for data review. And so if the driver has a phone, or if the motor carrier gives them a camera to take pictures with a date stamp, that we encourage our drivers to take that opportunity while they're going through the inspection to document what it is that the law enforcement is identifying as a violation. And what I've been told by law enforcement is that provided that it is safe for the officer, safe for the public, and of course safe for the driver to participate in that inspection and identify what those issues are, that law enforcement is happy to identify and show the driver what it is that they are seeing from their perspective as to why it's a violation. And so I'll give you another example. When I was doing a ride-along, a motor carrier gets pulled over, and we go in the barn and we look underneath the tractor trailer, and under the tractor it looks like there is a hole in one of the brakes, the brake drums, and I can see where what appears to be manufactured holes, but then also another hole that looks as though it's been either deteriorated by rust or wear and tear. But certainly I'm no mechanic, and the law enforcement officer that I was with goes and looks up what the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations require in terms of safety for maintaining the brake system, and determines that based on that particular puncture in the brake, that would put the motor carrier out of service. So the driver proceeds out from the barn and parks the vehicle, and the law enforcement officer advises him which particular brake it was that we were looking at. Of course, the driver couldn't go underneath the vehicle because he was in the seat watching the truck while we were underneath. And after the inspection, the driver gets an out-of-service order for the equipment. And in that instance, if that were my client, I want to make sure that we take a picture of the brake as it looked at the time of the inspection after the vehicle's removed and sitting in the parking lot, and look at, okay, is this a puncture because of wear and tear, or is this just part of the brakes, and this is a manufactured specification? And so that's another important opportunity for the driver to take to make a record of what it looks like at the time of the inspection. Now, obviously, that's going to have to be repaired before the motor carrier can go back on the road and with that equipment. But the sooner, Tommy, as you mentioned, the sooner that you can get that information on site during the inspection or immediately preceding when it's the next safe opportunity, we want to do so to document as well as we can for making that challenge, or at least determining if that violation is accurate.
Good point.
So now there certainly are instances where motor carriers are just familiarizing themselves with the DataQ process, or their drivers, and they get the violations, but they don't have the photographs and they don't have the video. So we look at their pre-inspection reports, we look at any maintenance history that they have for the equipment, and if all the pre-inspection reports and the maintenance history for the equipment shows that everything's been repaired accordingly, we submit that documentation to show that immediately preceding the inspection, we had a clean inspection report, and here's the maintenance history that shows that this equipment has been meticulously maintained while it's been in operation. And then after the fact, say, if we can document through a photograph that here is, again, this is what let's say with that brake drum, this is what it looked like both before and after inspections, and shows that it's in accordance with manufacturer specifications. So even though we may not have it at the time, we can still go back and look at, if we've got other records or documents, to do a DataQ review. It's not a lost opportunity for us. There's other things and avenues that we look at to be successful in a DataQ challenge. So here I skipped ahead to the warnings, but this was just you have probably had an opportunity to read it. The FMCSA's positions on warnings. And here again is the slide that we talked about, looking back at the main page, where you can click on the action item that you want to pursue with your DataQ. And this is the next page that comes up if it's an instance for a DOT audit. And again, it's saying DataQs cannot be used to request safety rating reviews pursuant to the noted CFR or responses to notice of claims. There's a separate procedure that we follow there when addressing those issues. So that's, that being said, there still is other opportunities here to correct any errors that may have been reported on the system, just for the purpose of addressing what is reported on the analysis and information page for the motor carrier. So here is, for each possible avenue, we get then another prompt from the DataQ interface saying, okay, confirm your selection if you believe there is an error with the display of your safety audit results. The safety audit examines the motor carrier's operations to provide education and technical assistance. And so they gather this information, but again, this is more of a reporting function. And similarly here with a compliance review that's been conducted. Or if there's been an examination. Again, often we get the notice of audits or the notice from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration after one of these events have taken place, and we take the appropriate procedural steps. But there may be another opportunity for us to advise, let's say, in a petition for change in safety rating, that we're data queuing, or we're submitting a request for data review on any errors that we believe are identified on our profile. And same thing here with the fines. Oftentimes, after an on-site inspection's been performed on a motor carrier, they may get hit with a fine. And there's an opportunity in the Code of Federal Regulations for us to either challenge those fines or negotiate the fines. So here we have to. This is why it's so important that we get involved with these notice of claims, so that we make sure the motor carrier is not forfeiting any rights that they would otherwise have under the Code of Federal Regulations, and not just limiting themselves to what is available on this interface. As and again, I'm just going through the options here for what the insured can do in terms of making sure their information is correct on their MCS 150 or their operating authority. Some of our carriers will do that as well. And so this is just to give you an idea of what the motor carrier is going to look at, just making sure we've got the correct information. And this is important too, because what we see happening right now is we're getting out-of-service orders and requests to consolidate DOT records of various motor carriers, the chameleon carrier problem that is coming up in the industry. So it's important that we have the correct information on our motor carrier, because we don't want to be the target of one of those out-of-service orders. We certainly see a number of them come through the door too often with respective clients, and have to address that. And some of it is a matter of just making sure that we've got their operations correctly structured and that their information is accurate as reported to the DOT. So that just goes through some of the options. So it's a powerful tool in that regard. It does give the access to the motor carrier to make sure that everything that they have with respect to their DOT number is what it should be. And it's also for those who insure household good motor carriers. Here again, just ensuring that the information is correct, which is reported about their profile is also accurate. So here we have the complaint section that we indicated. And that's the next, if it's a fraudulent, they did not do business with that particular individual, they have an opportunity to object to that particular move. Or if it is a duplicate of two complaints, they have a way to challenge that. So I kind of like this page, because sometimes we come up with issues where the DataQ portal doesn't really provide a means for resolving the issue. And what I advise in that situation is, let's see if there is a way that we can work with law enforcement to address the issue that's going on. And in my experience with working with the Florida Highway Patrol, they've always been very responsive to any of my inquiries or opportunities to meet with them to address any concerns that I've had. And there certainly have been anomalies that I have encountered with the system. Instances where what is reported in what's called the Analyst Guide for the Best Practices for Federal and State Agency Users may say one thing, but what the state, that is the law enforcement, what they can actually do to modify a violation is not available to them when they're looking on the other side of the interface. So if those situations come up, I'm always one to have a conversation with the law enforcement to see what we can do to correct the issue. And also, puts us in, I want to, stress to law enforcement that we're here to make sure that we're doing everything to make sure the motor carrier complies with the commercial motor safety regulations. And that's why we're here, that the motor carrier hired us for that purpose. They are just as concerned about the safety of their vehicles, the public and their drivers, as law enforcement. Let me move down here.
Then you get the confirmation. Okay. Go ahead.
Right. So here, if you had any concerns, you can report that directly to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And there have been instances where I found, again, some anomalies in inquiring, well, based on the publication that's put forth by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, is in conflict with what is actually being done in our particular RDR. So there is a communication portal for the motor carrier in that instance right here. Here is for drivers who have received a violation. Perhaps it's an instance where myself or one of my colleagues, the law firm, has gone into court and we've obtained a dismissal for the driver of a traffic infraction that's a result from a commercial motor vehicle violation, and we want to ensure that that violation doesn't show up for that driver in his record or her record. And so here's an opportunity for the driver to ensure that his or her record is clean of that violation, or those points have been removed. And there are some instances that I have found where the violation is removed, the points for the violation are removed for the motor carrier, but not necessarily for the driver. And so if you look up the analysis and information profile of the motor carrier, you'll see where the inspection may have resulted in the violation, but for the violation, there'll be 0 points. On the other hand, if you go to the driver's profile, the violation will still be there. And the reason for that is, as I'm informed by law enforcement, is that so motor carriers that are pulling PSP reports before hiring drivers can see that violation. Otherwise, if the violation is removed from the system altogether, then it's also removed from the driver, which is interesting that it's connected in that fashion. So I know, like Tommy, as you mentioned, that there's going to be updates to the system, and I'll be curious to see if that is one of them.
Yeah.
So another important point that I want to make about the inspections and violations is that in some instances we may have a traffic violation where there's a court appearance for the driver. And my recommendation to the clients is, and obviously there's a cost to this, but to appear at that violation if they believe that they shouldn't have been cited for the particular offense. And so we've gone into court for the motor carriers and had an adjudication of a dismissal. And what that allows us to do is, as of August 23rd, 2014, if there's been an adjudication where of a dismissal, we can upload that dismissal into the system so that that violation can be removed. So if it's dismissed, however, with a fine or court cost, the violations won't be removed, or if it still results in original charge, it will not be removed. But if it's dismissed with a fine, dismissed without a fine, it'll be removed, or if there's a not guilty determination, it'll be removed, or if they're convicted of a lesser charge, then they may change the weight severity to 1 and append the inspection to indicate that the violation resulted in a conviction of a different charge. So we have those instances where by going through the court process, we can also preserve our scores. And so in that instance, the motor carrier and the driver has to be aware of any time-sensitive limitations because there's a certain amount of time that we have to file a not guilty plea, for example, or a request for a hearing. So what I always recommend to my clients is any time that we get an inspection to verify whether or not there was also a court appearance that was associated with that inspection, and whether we want to exercise that right to pursue that court appearance. And most of the time the answer by the client is yes, we disagree with the violation, let's move forward with the court proceeding or any other administrative avenue we have, so we can get these adjudications removed from, or at least the points removed from the system.
And the point that you added here is just because a court did it, though, the FMCA doesn't know about it, so it's going to take that information to be sent to the FMCA to affect that part of it. They don't get track of the court system. And this is where this works. Okay, that's good.
Exactly. So here's where it says you have selected citation dismissed in court, so this is the next avenue to go in and address and upload the dismissal. So we get the order of dismissal from the court, or we get the not guilty adjudication, and we proceed to file it and ensure that the points are removed. Now in Florida, what I like is that oftentimes we will get commercial motor vehicle examination reports that are associated with monetary penalties. So Florida has set up a commercial motor carrier review board, and under these administrative proceedings, the motor carrier has the opportunity within 60 days of the citation to file a request for a hearing. And I've gone before the motor carrier review board based on various violations with my clients, and have argued before the motor carrier review board why the penalty should be, or why the monetary penalty should be refunded. And one of the unique things about the motor carrier review board is that you actually have to pay the penalty before you go before the motor carrier review board in most instances. So here you have two conditions precedent, two things, action items the motor carrier has to do, and for the driver to be aware of in Florida. And that goes for any other administrative remedies that may be available across other states. Let's look for what do we have to do and when do we have to do it, so that we don't lose our right for a hearing. And even though,
other states have a similar thing that you're aware of. We're just using Florida's example, right? Maybe Florida's maybe more aggressive than some other states.
Right. So in Florida, this is where we have a lot of opportunity to exercise our right to get a dismissal of the monetary fine. Now, the jurisdiction of the Motor Carrier Review Board is just to refund the penalty, which is unique. So that they're not actually, as in a court of law, adjudicating the merits of the case, but they are in the sense of if they find that the violation should not have been issued, that they will refund the penalty. In situations where perhaps we've had an unauthorized passenger and the motor carrier has a policy that says we do not authorize passengers, the driver signs off and acknowledges that policy, and then proceeds to go and put a passenger in his cab or her cab, and we get a citation for it. Well, the motor carrier, will take immediate corrective action, terminate the driver for violating the company policy, and then we'll take that before the Motor Carrier Review Board and get an argue for a complete refund of those fines. Once I have that refund and that notice, that order from the Motor Carrier Review Board, then I'll upload that as an adjudication.
Okay.
So just because it may only be for fines is an important point, that you still want to exercise that right and look carefully and have your insured look very carefully at all the documents that they're receiving, because there may be other opportunities there that they can harness to obtain a dismissal of that violation.
All right.
So here's just that, and this now, I know time flies. It's been since August 23rd, 2014.
Yeah, that's what you went through earlier. What you can do it if this happens that way. That form you showed earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's a new thing. We read about that when it came forward.
Right. So that's been in place. Although I had a unique experience with that because I got a dismissal before that August 23rd, 2014 effective date, and what the state analyst guide indicated was that the state had the discretion on whether or not it was going to remove that documentation. I mean, and what it provides is that the new policy only applies to data or citations issued during roadside inspections after this date, but that if the state had reason to believe that in fairness it dictates a removal of the violation, the state could do that. The problem was, even though this particular guideline that the state had provided, at least, or purported to give the right to the states to remove that violation, there wasn't a means to do so on the interface for the state side. So that was one of those anomalies that I mentioned that we encountered, where despite what the FMCSA says in their policy guide, the state didn't have an opportunity to make that correction. And so that's another reason why we get involved to address situations like that. And so here's this analyst guide. It's available online. It's the DataQ's analyst guide. It's available on the Federal Motor Carriers Safety Administration website. And it goes through a number of things in terms of how much information is enough information for an RER, and what is the time frame that you should file an RDR. And like I mentioned, the more information that we have to support the basis for why the points should be removed, why the violation is incorrect, the more likelihood of success that we have prevailing. And while there is no what we call statute of limitations on filing an RDR, obviously the sooner you file it with respect to the violation, the more impact it'll have if we are successful on the score. And so obviously that means that the motor carriers are most concerned with the most recent violations that have come about on their scores to address. But what we do is we'll go through, and it's important, if we're not doing it, that the insureds are doing it, but auditing those scores. And Tommy, as you mentioned, that there's programs available for that that'll do that for these motor carriers to ensure that they're jumping on the opportunity where a violation has been incorrectly assessed. And then once we identify that violation, to act promptly to get that request uploaded. And then the state will endeavor, and their guideline is they try to get a response within 14 days back to the motor carrier as to their determination of whether the violation was correctly assessed or not. One point, though, that is important that I find is that motor carriers will come to me and say, well, we did a DataQ review, but we didn't prevail. You know, I'll look at it, and if there's merit to the challenge, and I'll say, well, it looks like maybe the same officer that issued the citation was also the officer that was reviewing your RDR. Let's resubmit another RDR. In Florida, there's 3 levels of review that the motor carrier has, and I find that a lot of companies aren't aware that some states have multiple levels of data review that they can go through, and different authority that they're going to be able to communicate with on their data review. So we'll go up.
That was one of the problems, the earlier ones. It goes back to the same officer. He or she's not going to change their mind. So now, as you say, the states and the government has other layers down to take that original emotional part out of it.
Right, right. So anytime I see that it goes back to the same officer that issued the violation, then my response is let's submit a different RDR or an additional RDR to see if we can get that before a different law enforcement officer. I know in Florida it'll go to a different level all the way up until it reaches the chief of the Florida Highway Patrol. In Arizona, Tommy, as you know, they have their own board that's created that actually has one industry professional on the review board, which is what I know a lot of folks are advocating for across the many states. And so it's important to ensure that you're exercising those opportunities for each state. And unfortunately, there isn't any guide out there or publications from the FMCSA that identifies how each state handles an RDR. Although the FMCSA recommends that the state have its own basically a council or process for how it reviews them, in addition to what they state in their user guide. So hopefully that will be available to motor carriers, because I think it's really important. It would be important information for them to have. And we'll see if that's in part of what is going to be an update to the systems. We'll see if they include that. This manual came out, this last one was in the 2nd edition in December 2014. So I'd like to see if that update comes and provides some clarification to what we see here and some of the issues that are confronting motor carriers.
Is that it? That's it. Bridgette, one thing, the part of this FAST Act also requires that 18-month study of all this kind of stuff. So I think the government's getting pressure, and the state's getting pressure to do a better job. So the thing here is we got to stay on top of it. We got to do it immediately, because obviously if you don't challenge it within 2 years, who cares, because it goes away from the system. But it is an important thing to get it right, and they are a lot of the wrong things there. And people like yourselves helps us and helps our agent. And here's her contact number. This is available on our website. I encourage you to stay abreast of these things and get involved in it. Again, offering your insured more than the policy that we deliver to help them in this very valid area. Bridgette, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and effort, and we'll see you at the annual conference in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Tommy. I appreciate the opportunity. Take care.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye-bye.
Bye.